Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's event on advancing climate action. Today, we'll be highlighting new research on how small and mid-sized cities in the U.S. are implementing and funding climate action. My name is Stacy Fox, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston University Initiative on Cities. The initiative is an urban research center that connects research and practice to help advance the livability and resilience of cities around the world. We are so thrilled to have a fantastic panel of speakers today, whom I'll introduce shortly. But before that, just wanted to give you a quick rundown of our program. So we're going to begin with a brief presentation of findings from the BU Small City Actions to Lower Emissions Study, or SCALE for short, which looked at how cities with populations between 25,000 to 300,000 residents fund and implement climate actions, with some attention to how justice is negotiated in that work. We're then going to transition to a panel conversation with leaders from Albany, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Burlington, Vermont, who are going to help us ground these findings and share how their cities are tackling some of these challenges. After that, we'll open up the floor to audience Q&A, so please be sure to submit your questions throughout the webinar using the Zoom's Q&A function. A quick note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website for later viewing, and we'll be sure to drop a link to that in the chat. So I'm going to introduce each speaker as they present today. So up first, I'm very happy to introduce Julia Wagner. Julia is a visiting public impact scholar at Boston University. Her research focuses on the intersection of municipal climate finance, decarbonization, and housing affordability. She's passionate about using housing justice as a framework for climate action and organizes around local climate policies in New York City. Julia is also a public servant and currently works on climate resilience issues in the public transit sector. So Julia, I'm very happy to turn the floor over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Again, my name is Julia Wagner. I'm a visiting scholar at BU and a member of the Scale Study research team. So grateful to have spent the last year talking to sustainability practitioners across the country, and we're really excited to share some of our early findings with you today. Going to advance my slides. Here we go. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to our study before going into some of our findings around climate action. And today we're really focusing on strategies that cities are taking to advance emissions reductions across the country. So the SCALE study is the Small and Mid-sized City Actions to Lower Emissions study. We wanted to understand with this research how cities are moving past emissions accounting and planning into the implementation phase. So what are those policies looking like? Our focus was on cities with populations between 25,000 to 300,000 residents. And this is because a lot of climate research in the US is actually focused on our largest cities. But these cities are really the outliers. And what we wanted to know was what cities with smaller populations are working on. We've reached out to sustainability practitioners in cities across the country, and we got really great and widespread feedback. You can see that distribution of our respondents in the map on this slide, with a fairly even distribution across the country, bearing in mind that there's just fewer cities in the Great Plains, North and South, as well as Alaska and Hawaii. And for the research that we're presenting on today, what we did was reach out to practitioners in cities across the country. We started with an interview with those practitioners and then sent them a follow-up web survey with 82 cities participating. And just a brief note on our definitions here. We're defining climate action as the implementation of a law, policy, or program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from municipal operations, from commercial activity, and residential activities within the municipality. Just want to note that, of course, responding to natural disasters, focusing on adaptation or resilience, these are all climate actions as well. However, they were not in the scope of our research. So today we're really focused on climate action, focused on emissions reductions. Okay, so now to some of our results. First, we wanted to share a little bit about our respondents, the participants in this study, and where they're coming from. You can see that folks are working on emissions reductions within a really wide range of offices. And where you're based within your city organization has a lot of bearing on the colleagues you're working with, the kind of political access you get, and even the tools that you might have at your disposal. So we wanted to share that there is this really broad range of diversity when it comes to the offices that people are working in. And kind of echoing the diversity of city offices, we also saw a true cornucopia of actions that cities are taking to reduce their emissions. Um, and from this, we also learned that cities are not only interested in reducing emissions that are emanating from their own operations, like running city hall, or handling waste management within the city, things like that. They're also focused on drawing down emissions that come from city residents, industries that are in town, and businesses. So that's the work to reduce private emissions as well. And we've distilled this work into four categories. Um, the most popular of which was decarbonizing municipal facilities, operations, and services. We found that cities are really leading by example, tackling the emissions that are coming from City Hall or coming from, the regular operations that cities are already undergoing. The next set of actions was work on public infrastructure to reduce both municipal emissions as well as community emissions. So this is kind of using urban design and maintenance of infrastructure to nudge low carbon behavior. So one example might be installing city-owned EV chargers to kind of incentivize the use of electric vehicles. Next bucket is work to curb emissions from residents, industries, and commercial spaces. Um, this work often looked like developing regulations or incentive programs. And our last bucket are novel municipal energy services. Um, Things like anywhere from bulk purchasing electricity through community choice aggregation down to developing city-owned renewable energy for community use. So we saw that less than half of our cities that we interviewed are attempting these policies, but that a growing number of cities are working to develop them. Another way to break down this information is to consider the kinds of policy interventions behind them. So we took a look at some of the most common here. Again, we see that cities are really using their existing capacities, especially with capital projects on city facilities and infrastructure, as one of the most common approaches to spurring emissions reductions. Less common was the development of incentive programs, which might come with resource constraints, or implementing regulations, which can sometimes come with political constraints and administrative constraints. Um, but in general, we are seeing a really broad range of policy interventions at work here, and cities are doing a lot of them. And ultimately, we found that the policies that our participant cities were selecting were really based on pragmatic decision making. And this was the work of balancing many factors that are unique to any city. Things like their staff capacity, the funding that is available to them, and that they have the capacity to administer, the certain kinds of regulatory authorities that they have within the city and their various agencies, as well as the political landscape, both locally and within the state, and then overall federally. And in our brief, which Stacey already mentioned, we will be sharing after this webinar, we really dig into and discuss how each potential policy intervention comes with its own set of opportunities and constraints. So for instance, developing a capital project in a public facility might be a straightforward approach because it's something that's already sort of in the wheelhouse of the city's public works department. On the other hand, it presents challenges around cost. Maybe there's operational coordination challenges. And these are the sorts of constraints that might make it infeasible for a city at any given time. So we, in our brief, kind of go into these various policy interventions and talk through some of these trade-offs. We also found that our participating cities had no shortage of constraints to that they were facing, but every city, um, was kind of facing its own menu of things that it was trying to work around. And this is why it was exciting to see how cities were innovating around these very constraints. We really saw that practitioners were working within their context to solve problems rather than just copy and pasting ideas from other places. And that some of the most effective policy ideas were actually responsive, directly responsive to their city's situational constraints. So we've shared some common themes here, such as state preemption. We saw a lot of shifting the focus from certain kinds of regulations onto incentives or city procurement pathways, limited operational funding. We saw many cities sharing resources such as staff, like sustainability coordinators, or even like applying to grants within a coalition. Strained municipal staff interest was a common theme among a lot of cities, and we saw a lot of strategies to build relationships and trust among colleagues within the city. A lot of cities have residents that have limited incomes and struggle to invest in decarbonization, and we saw cities really innovating around bringing low carbon energy onto the grid to make it accessible to everyone, no matter their income status. And finally, we saw cities that are rapidly growing, and this is, really fortunate from a revenue perspective, but can sometimes offer some challenges when it comes to trying to lower emissions. Um, and we saw these cities figuring out new kinds of collaboration, such as collaborating with their energy utilities to work on innovative ways to lower their emissions. So ultimately, our takeaway from this research is that there are many, many roads to municipal emissions reductions, and that those cities that reported the most success were creating their own pathways with these kind of four themes in mind, building strong and trusting relationships within their city government, as well as their community members and partners, keenly balancing the trade-offs between their capacities and their limitations. These cities were taking a close and good look at the constraints before them and using that as a way to guide their innovation. And finally, they're pragmatically making use of what are ultimately always limited resources and really making some targeted impacts and scaling them to the right size for each of their cities. So thank you so much for joining us today. That is all from me. I'm going to pass it back to Stacy and our panel.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that great presentation. Really excited to now dig into some of these findings with the panel. So I'm going to turn things over to them, but before I do, some quick introductions. So moderating, and I'll invite our panelists too to come on camera. Great. So moderating our panel today is Anne Short-Gennady. Anne is an associate professor of Earth and Environment at Boston University. She's a human environment geographer who studies the social and political dimensions of conservation, wildlife management, and climate change. She uses mixed methods to understand how socio-political and ecological processes catalyze changes in land use, management, and policy. Her research experience spans issues as diverse as wildlife management, climate justice, disaster risk reduction, and cannabis cultivation. And Anne often collaborates with researchers across disciplines and works directly with natural resource agencies, local governments, residents, and other decision makers to connect her research with practice. Joining Anne are three leaders from Albany, Ann Arbor, and Burlington. Emma Terwilliger serves as the energy manager in the City of Albany's Office of Sustainability, working alongside her director, Jason West. Together, they oversee efforts to reduce emissions and develop adaptation strategies to climate change for both city operations and the community. Emma has contributed to the city's membership in ICLEI Cities Forward, its achievement of silver status in New York's Climate Smart Community Program, and receiving the 2025 Renewables Advancement Award for advancing 100% renewable energy in city operations. Currently, Emma's main focus is coordinating the outreach effort for Albany's Climate Vulnerability Analysis and Action Plan for both community and city operations. Julie Roth is an energy manager for the City of Ann Arbor's Office of Sustainability and Innovations. She leads a team whose work focuses on the creation, implementation, and management of programs to facilitate community-wide adoption of solar, building electrification, and energy efficiency, as well as networked geothermal, commercial, and residential building benchmarking and greenhouse gas accounting. She's been recognized as a Crain's Detroit 2023 Leader in Energy and has received awards from the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association and the Sierra Club for her work on renewables. Now, our third panelist, Jennifer Green, is having a little bit of technical problems, but hopefully she'll be with us very shortly. But I'm still going to introduce her so
I
that
think
hopefully
she's
she'll
just
be.
joined us, actually.
Oh, great, Danielle. Fantastic. So, Jennifer,
We're just
whenever
working
you're
on adding her as a panelist.
perfect. Thank you. So she will be with us shortly, but let me introduce her. So Jennifer is the Director of Sustainability and Workforce Vitality for the City of Burlington, housed in the city's Municipal Electrical Department, Burlington Electric Department. Jennifer's work involves efforts to transition Burlington to net zero energy in the thermal and transportation sectors, and in this capacity supports, designs, and implements projects within the electric department, including work across city offices and with stakeholders throughout Burlington and beyond. Jennifer joined the Burlington Electric team after several years in the city's Community and Economic Development Office, where she oversaw the city's sustainability plan and the climate action plan. Just a quick reminder before I turn things over to Anne that we'll have time at the end of this for some Q&A, so please submit your questions as the discussion is going on, and you can do that using Zoom's Q&A function. So Anne, over to you.
Thanks so much for those introductions, and thanks to our panelists for joining us today. One of the things that we confirmed with this research that Julia talked about is that cities are taking many different actions to work to reduce municipal and community emissions. And so to open our discussion, I was hoping you could each talk about a policy or a program that you see as one of your most effective climate actions. And so I was hoping maybe that Julie could start and then Emma, and then we'll give Jennifer a moment to settle in before answering.
Yeah, sure. Whoops, there I am. Okay, sorry. My screen went black for a moment. That was interesting. I was thinking about this question, and I was having a hard time narrowing it down to a program or policy that was the most effective climate action. But I think what I wanted to highlight that I think is one effective sort of suite of policies that we have developed in Ann Arbor is in our residential building sector, because Ann Arbor has goals of community-wide carbon neutrality. And so this is a difficult one. Buildings represent 2/3 of our emissions, and we don't own most of them. And so if we're really going to hit our goals, scope 1 and scope 2 emissions from the residential sector are huge. And of scope 1 and scope 2, scope 1 is harder. The emissions that are coming directly from the buildings themselves. Everyone has a gas furnace in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Everyone has a gas water heater, dryer, many gas stoves. And that feels like a very big lift because there's no centralized source of anything. And it requires buy-in and engagement from everybody or lots of people. So we have a suite of residential facing policies, 2 ordinances, and 4 kind of programs that kind of interact with each other. So ordinances, regulations that we've developed are HERD, home energy rating disclosure. Every home that gets sold in Ann Arbor has to get a certified DOE home energy score and post it in their real estate listing. So it's starting to highlight the energy use intensity of just like miles per gallon for your car, but for your home. And then we are doing outreach to new home buyers to kind of pull them into our programs and resources to make improvements. And then in the rental housing market, we have a brand new ordinance that's going to affect next month. We've been working on for 5 years, called the Green Rental Housing Ordinance, which sets minimum baseline efficiency standards for rental housing in a way that doesn't bump up against our preemptive state laws for building codes. So we've had to be very creative there. So we're starting to sort of daylight and benchmark residential buildings, but to make this palatable to our electeds and those who are responsible for passing ordinances and regulations. We've also paired it with with programs to help make improvements, to help residents do these things. So we have a home energy advisor that's a free service that does on-site assessments and gives people customized decarbonization plans for their homes, when to replace appliances, what they could replace them with, what does their insulation look like. We have a heat pump concierge that we partnered with what was a startup. I think that maybe they're beyond startup status now, called Pearl Edison, that designs heat pump systems and then subcontracts with contractors and does QA for the whole process. So we didn't have a supply chain and a contractor network that was prepared to do any of this work, and that has really helped fill that gap. We have a robust home energy rebate program we're very lucky to be able to offer because we tax ourselves to support this work. We raised our own property taxes in Ann Arbor by a vote of like 71%. And we're putting a majority of that money back into rebates to give people thousands of dollars to do their insulation and their heat pumps. And then finally, we have a solarized bulk buy program that is oftentimes the gateway drug in, where people come to learn about getting on-site solar on their homes, learn about rim joists, and now we've got them like on the end of the hook. So I would say that sort of cohort of programs and policies, we are starting to see by permit tracking measurable improvements in how many water heaters are getting replaced by heat pumps and how many rebates are being taken up for insulation and air sealing, and it's really exciting. And then there's all the people attached to all of those pieces of equipment who are learning and becoming their own climate advocates and telling their neighbors and becoming engaged. So I think that's where I'll leave it.
Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thank you for the question. One of the things that came to top of my mind was the purchasing of our city's streetlights from our utility was one of the main drivers for the creation of our Office of Sustainability. Our office in Albany had some intermittent kind of office or positions that weren't permanent that act as a sustainability official and helped move things along kind of one project at a time. But creation of this larger streetlight purchasing from our utility really realized some operational savings and gave us some metrics that we could measure and implement in other projects. So through that project, we were able to save $2.3 million annually in just operational savings. And then that's 3,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases. And that process took a few years. And kind of following that model towards other projects that we're looking forward in building decarbonization and fleet electrification, we're kind of looking for that same mindset of looking for that low-hanging fruit with those easy emissions that also translate to cost-effective things for our operations. One of the things that Albany has to deal with is we have a small operational budget. So things that motivate our kind of operations internally is when we can realize those savings that kind of go hand in hand with our greenhouse reductions. And I'll kind of pass it on to Jennifer there.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks, Anne, for hosting us. And apologies to Danielle. There was a lot of back and forth trying to get on. Zoom really gave me a runaround this afternoon. So thanks for your patience. As we were prepping for this call, we were talking about both carrots and sticks in our offices. And I'm not going to talk about carrots now. Maybe that will come up later. There are two sort of sticks, i.e. policy initiatives that I'm particularly excited about and that I want to share. So the first is our rental weatherization policy. So I'm sure like Albany, like Ann Arbor, we have a high rental rate, 60% of our units are rental. And of course, we've got this issue, referred to as the split incentive, whereby property owners pass on energy bills to their tenants, have very little incentive to make any upgrades. And given our high rental rate, low vacancy rate, renters are sort of stuck with no place to go and not in a position really to complain a whole lot because they're happy enough to have housing. So we knew that we needed a policy to address poor performing rental properties. So essentially, our rental weatherization policy says if your landlord and your building is using more than 50,000 BTUs per square foot, there's a timeline by where you need to drop that load. So we're in the process now of implementing that policy. We started from a calendar perspective with enforcing those that were using the most BTUs, i.e., 90,000 and above. Those are obviously the most leaking where we can get the greatest return on investment. And we're slowly working our way by end of 2026, in theory, we will have targeted everybody between just over 50, sort of 50 to 59,000. So I hope that's clear, and if not, I'm happy to send folks information post the webinar. The second policy I want to talk about is our building electrification and carbon impact pollution fee ordinance. So if you are building anything new in Burlington, or you're a large building over 50,000 square feet, and you are replacing a system, you have two choices. You can either use a renewable system, think heat pump, geothermal, et cetera, or you can use fossil fuels. If you're going to use fossil fuels, we're going to calculate at $150 a ton what the emissions for that equipment will be, and you're going to be charged for it. So I'll just end by saying that was quite novel. We don't have the authority in Burlington to be charging carbon fees, so we had to go to the legislature, ask for a charter change. We had to put it to the voters, et cetera. So it's been quite a process getting that up and running, but it's novel and I'm excited about it. So I'll leave you with those two.
Thanks so much. It's nice to see some of the different flavors of actions and some of the different approaches and ways of working around these challenges. That's one of the themes of both of our research and both what we're hoping to show through this panel. To give a little bit more context of the particular situations where you're working, I was hoping you could each talk a little bit about your position in your program. So how long your program has existed, where you sit in the city, and the ways that you see that giving particular advantages or perhaps challenges associated with these placements. So maybe we'll start with Emma on this one, then you can pass it on.
Yeah, so our Office of Sustainability is housed in the Department of Admin Services. So in our city, we have Department of Admin Services, and that's along the lines of our General Works Department, our Water Department. All these are separate departments. And then so the Admin Service Department really kind of naturally fits as an overhead department that works with each individual department within the budget or through HR. So those connections with those departments are already established. So that kind of made it really easy for us to start building those relationships and gaining access to those people who we were working with and trying to kind of build the climate literacy and understanding of why we need a sustainability office. And pointing that from like the admin services point of view, it helped kind of push us in the right direction. One thing that our office was created informally as it is now in 2020, and over the past 5 years, we've done a lot of action planning and grant applications in that. And being in admin services has really helped with that. Where we are at now and are starting to adapt is looking at we are going to be in the engineering department for the first time next year. And we're looking towards that just to build in some of these planning that we have been doing over the past 5 years. And we do run the streetlights from admin services currently. And bringing in some of that to the engineering department and being more hand in hand. So while they are looking at other projects, we can offer our knowledge set as they're going through their projects. One thing that we have realized, New York State, and I'm sure kind of with the federal programs, you have to, if you are designing your project, or if you have your project plan without designing to the standards of these rebates, you often miss out by not designing them properly, or you miss something and then your project can't get the refund that you anticipated for. So really being at the start of when we're looking at the problem and being with the engineers who design our project implementation will help us bring more of these projects to the finish line. So being in admin services has really helped us kind of make our headway, but being in engineering will help us kind of establish ourselves more. And as we move into engineering, we mentioned in our my introduction, but our climate action plan is currently going right now. So a lot of being in admin services was focused around building that climate action plan, doing the grant for it, and really accumulating all the actions. So as our climate action plan finishes, we'll be moving into engineering and helping implement whatever that plan is. So I'm really looking forward to that, and seeing where that brings us into more of this low-hanging fruit. And especially with our building electrification, we have a lot to do in terms of weatherization in our own buildings, and that's something we're eager to do as we transition into engineering.
Thanks. How about Jennifer?
I'm reminded that the USDN, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, did a study a bunch of years ago as to where sustainability people sat, and it was such an interesting display of all these different places, including Emma, like engineering. That so interesting. So I started in the Community and Economic Development Office, which is essentially the executive branch of the mayor, where we wrote the first climate action plan. So that was back in 2010. So fast forward to 2014, Burlington became the first city in the country to source 100% of its electricity from renewables. So that, coupled with sort of the findings of the climate action plan, which indeed indicated that buildings and ground transportation are the two biggest sectors, I moved to our municipal electric department, where we're now implementing our net zero energy strategy, which is essentially about reducing and eliminating fossil fuels in buildings and transportation. So that's where I sit now, and I don't know if anybody else is in an electric department, and it's a good fit for Burlington. Certainly not a one size fits all.
I have such Burlington, Vermont envy because of you have a state that's aligned and a utility that you own, and it just seems like this beautiful, I don't know, synergy of climate action potential. So in Ann Arbor, we had an energy office prior to 2018. And the Office of Sustainability and Innovations was born out of that office in 2019, I think 2018, 2019. Our climate action plan was developed in 2019. The city council declared a climate emergency based on citizens continually showing up at city council and saying, we're having a climate emergency. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? So they declared a climate emergency, instructed the staff of the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, which was like 1.5 FTE at the time, I think, to develop a plan to get to community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030, and gave them slash us 5 months to come up with that plan. So that's what we did. And so A20 was born. We sit in the city administrator's sort of office or division. And our director, Missy Stoltz, she's on the executive committee. So she has, like Emma, I think it's a very similar kind of setup, access at executive level, at the same level as sort of everyone who's advising to the administrator. And we have a sort of weak mayor, strong administrator kind of system in Ann Arbor. We are now a staff of, I think, 20 full-time. And then we have a bunch of part-time and AmeriCorps and temporary and things like that. So we've grown quite a bit in that amount of time. And that's kind of our birth story.
Thanks so much. As we've done this research, we've been really interested to hear about the ways that cities have innovated around challenges, the ways that cities sort of navigate trade-offs, because when you have limited resources, you end up always sort of finding places where you have to make decisions about what you're able to do or not. So I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about the ways that you have innovated when you face challenges, both sort of identifying what those challenges are and then what the innovation was. And Julie, I was hoping you could talk about that. And then Emma, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about some of the trade-offs that you might have faced and the ways through those trade-offs.
Yeah, I'm happy to. The challenge, one of the biggest challenges that we have when we're thinking about our scope two, our um, electricity generation in Ann Arbor, is that we have an investor-owned utility, and their climate goals are not aggressive, and not nearly as aggressive as our climate goals. And not only do we have a municipal utility, but we have a municipal utility, or not a municipal, investor-owned utility in perpetuity. We don't have a franchise agreement with them. There was some uh, legislature in 18 something in Michigan that decided in perpetuity was good words to use in in policy, and even a constitutional convention shortly thereafter could not change it. So it's been to courts. We can't get rid of. So we have no ability to negotiate with our franchise. We have no lever we have nothing. And so the Constitution in the state of Michigan does give municipalities the authority to municipalize or to create a parallel utility. Municipalization, there is a segment of Ann Arbor who would like to do that. It is, as everyone I'm sure on this call knows, a bear and a very difficult thing, lengthy legal processes, and a ton of money that we don't have. A parallel utility historically doesn't make a lot of sense from an efficiency standpoint, building poles and wires next to other poles and wires to compete for the same customers. But with the advancements of solar and storage and network geothermal and smart metering and all these kinds of things, load shifting, we now have seen a situation where we can create a parallel utility that focuses on 100% renewable generation, not large scale transmission and distribution. And we've done that. So we have launched a sustainable energy utility. It's a made up thing. We made it up. That all the pieces exist, but not in the way that it is a utility owned by a municipality. So essentially, we just hired our first executive director of the SEU, and this is going to be city-owned solar. You can sign up for this. The city will come and put solar on your business, your rental property, so solve some of that split incentive, Jennifer, that you were talking about, on your commercial property, whatever, your schools, and then bill you for that electricity, just like any utility would. So you will have two bills, one from your investor-owned utility that now becomes backup power for when we're now in the dark winter nights. And most of your power comes from the solar. When we start getting density in any given area, we can start creating microgrids with shared storage, so that buildings that don't have good solar access on their roofs can also benefit from that solar and renewable generation. And then network geothermal. We're building the first networked geothermal that will be owned by the sustainable energy utility right now in one of our lower income neighborhoods with 260 homes and some school buildings and some institutional buildings. And that will become an asset of the SEU in a similar way that solar will. So the sustainable energy utility is probably the most innovative thing that I think that we've done against being essentially backed into a corner of we have no negotiating power and no ability to procure renewable electricity for our city. So yeah, that was a big barrier and a big innovation and a big risk. We still gotta, see how it all works out, but we're confident, or we're projecting confidence. Yes.
That's wonderful.
Think I'm next. So, Albany's in a little different of a situation. We have an extremely, well, what I would consider a small budget for being a capital city. Our 70% of the properties in our city are tax exempt, so they're either nonprofit or have government status. So that puts a lot of burden on our community members for tax base, but most of our community members fall into the disadvantaged community. So we are heavily reliant on grants from the federal and state government and our state agencies and state authorities, which I'll get a little bit into later, for helping us move the needle on some of these measures. But what we also have been doing that because we are the capital city. We've also received a lot of attention for our vulnerabilities, and I think something that our leadership has done really well is making an example of Albany for the things that we do right and finding the synergies between climate activation or climate action and community activation, such as like workforce development, brownfield opportunity areas, housing stability. We seem to thrive in that way. So we have better partnerships with helping affordable housing go up. And when it does go up, prioritize it being an all electric building our community buildings that are going in. One of them is going to be our first all-electric building. And that was a considerable amount of work that we had to do and more financing that we had to bring in to do that. Um, so we have had a lot of constraints in our budget, and it just kind of goes back to that return on investment and communicating that we do have these goals that we are adhering to as a community. We have strong political leadership from our mayor who talks about climate change and the ramifications of it and sees our community as our government operations as owning of what we're doing and acting as uh, responsible for putting the effort in first if we're going to ask our community and our government, our state government, to do the same. So we really do what we can to kind of make sure we're in the conversations, especially um, what's going on with urban renewal and all those kind of things, making sure sustainability and climate action are a part of those conversations. And we're advocating for the synergies where like the workforce development is huge. Um, and yeah, I think that's kind of what I wanted to focus on with that question.
That's great. I want to use you nodded a little bit to the situation with the state, and I want to use that as a prompt to like talk about relationships. Cities
Absolutely.
can do a lot, but they really depend on collaboration with other partners and also resources from others as well. And so I was hoping you could each talk a little bit, and I'd like it if you could kind of continue the conversation there. Talk a little bit about ways that state government has something that they've done that has helped you implement emissions reductions, or something that you wish they could do. Really getting at this like state-city relationship back and forth.
For New York, I think we're in a really interesting area because we have a very high dependency on our state to lead in this. They have state goals, and the New York State released their scoping plan, which really kind of gives us how we have to get to the commitments that we set forth under our CLCPA, which are Climate Leadership and Protections Act. So there's some really strict goals in that CLPCA that our state passed. And the New York State scoping plan took a couple of years to kind of take that law and digest it and then go into each kind of sector, buildings, energy, forestry, community. It's a really thick document. But it really kind of writes out where we need to be looking for emissions reductions and really what are the systems that need to be looked at to identify and improve upon. Um, and from that scoping plan, the different agencies are really kind of looking at that as an example. So we have the Department of Environmental Conservation. They have their Climate Smart Communities program that's designing their programs to meet the scoping plan goals and stuff like that. We also have NYSERDA and NYPA, which I think are really important to our state's development, especially in innovations. NYSERDA is our research entity, and NYPA is our power authority. NYPA helped us purchase and continues to run our utility streetlights. Um, and they really help us utilize private mechanisms for public benefit. And I think that's really key. There's a lot of things that they can do. They can develop power, and we can purchase power from them. And they have been really helpful in kind of bringing in the level of expertise that you need if you're only going to be a two-person office, and put all that stuff into other departments. So New York State has really kind of been the guiding North Star that we've kind of been following. But what is been frustrating is in the news, we're starting to walk those things back a little bit as we're being challenged. And it's been hard as a city to kind of keep up with those commitments, especially as the federal government is walking back that line too. It's almost we need the state to step up more. So that's kind of a little bit of my frustrations. But I think we're at a better place than alternatively not having the state support because they do offer a lot of guidance and they attract talent that this is beyond the scope of what our city is trying to do. And we have really relied on that talent to really make us innovative and push and make us imagine more and have services that we can rely upon to be the professionals where I don't know how to develop a community solar project, but working with the Power Authority, who has the public protections in mind, is really important to our city and as we progress.
Jennifer, did you want to provide some perspective from Vermont?
Sure. So you ask Anne about initiatives that the state has taken that are having positive ramifications or maybe causing constraints on our end. So I'll mention that Vermont is a renewable energy standard state. The renewable energy standard was passed in 2015, the original, and it said at that point that distribution utilities need to begin to slowly transition away from fossil fuels and begin to source more and more of their electricity or energy from renewables. So as it so happens, by 2014, Burlington already had sourced 100% of our electricity from renewables. So we complied. Instead, now what we get is funding that we can use on strategic electrification. So we're able to offer a suite of rebates and incentives to help people reduce fossil fuels, natural gas, essentially, in Burlington, in buildings, through heat pumps, testing geothermal wells, et cetera, as well as in transportation. So we offer rebates on things like electric bicycles, electric vehicles. If you're a driver that drives a lot, you're a super driver, say an Uber or Lyft driver, we'll give you a higher rebate because we get a bigger return on carbon investment, a bigger return on investment if we invest in you, transitioning away from fossil fuels in your vehicle, et cetera. So again, it's the renewable energy standard that was passed by the state of Vermont in 2015, which has enabled us to access capital to strategic electrify by way of rebates and incentives.
And Julie for Michigan.
Michigan remaining jealous of Vermont. I would say that the relationship with the state is very, opportunistic sounds like more bad than it is. We're a very purple state. And unfortunately, climate has become politicized. And for a very long time, up until 2018, we were massively gerrymandered until we fixed that. And so when we have representation, or like our governor right now is very supportive of climate action and did a wonderful amount of work on a climate action plan for the state. And when for 2 magical years she had both houses, she was able to pass a renewable portfolio standard for utilities. And then one of the houses flipped, and you're never sure what's going to stick or what's going to be rolled back. And so for us, it's looking for opportunities when they arise. So when, that renewable portfolio standard was huge for the investor-owned utilities. If it sticks, it will help us tremendously in Ann Arbor and everywhere else. Um, uh, if it doesn't stick, so we just feel like we just have to keep going forward and watch for the times and opportunities where we have a legislature or bipartisan appeal to something. We have real constraints around building codes and what municipalities can do. What we would like to do is, for example, regulate things like new buildings and what you can build and what resources you can use to heat and cool your buildings. We are objectively not allowed to do that. So we would very much, those sorts of things would have to be changed at the state level to enable local municipalities to do things like this, and there doesn't seem to be appetite there. So we have, so it's like it's a little bit of both. We look for opportunities and we just keep going as Ann Arbor, trying to sort of lead the way in the state because we tend to be the one of the more climate focused cities within the state of Michigan.
Thanks for those perspectives. I think they really give a sense of some of the different contexts in which your three cities, but also cities across the country are working in terms of thinking about the relationship to the state, thinking about budget constraints, residents' willingness and excitement for this kind of work as well as their own resources. We had one question from the audience, and so if others have questions out there, please put them in the Q&A section. And the question is directed to Emma, but I think others can speak to it as well. The question is about if you have meet resistance working or thinking about working in the engineering department. And if so, do you have any advice on effective means of countering that?
So, yes and no. The resistance that I find when we go into different departments is there's a lot of resistance in bringing something new. Most of our departments already have constraints that they are working around, whether it's they're under-resourced or they're understaffed or they're under most of those things. Under-resourced and understaffed is kind of summarize most of it. So the way I approach our people who are leading these projects is I try to bring in more capacity. So understanding where I can help and understanding where that burden is and how I can limit it by bringing in some of that stuff. So a lot of we aren't doing much work in some of the things that we should be doing in terms of energy efficiency and stuff. So I am approaching bringing in my level of expertise as offering capacity in ways that could help the department. We are also going through a mayoral transition right now, so we will have a new head of our engineering department coming on in the next year. I'm not sure who that is going to be yet, but I anticipate that they are going to be a climate focused or an advocate. Seems to be the intention of our new mayor to kind of continue in this direction. So I think having the good leadership from the new head engineer coming in and then continuing to be a point of offering help and services to our staff is going to be where we find our synergies within our workforce.
That's helpful. And actually, what you were just saying speaks to another question that came in. So I'm going to throw this idea out for any of you in terms of thinking about resistance, but also the question that came in was about facing administrative changes or changes in the administration. And as you face those changes, have you thought about any asks or system changes that you might have for the next administration and what you would want to gain from that or change?
I might mention that our former mayor embraced mitigation and working on mitigation, hence all the emphasis on building electrification and transportation electrification. Since then, we've had two major floods in Burlington and well, across the state, and Burlington was impacted. So our new mayor is really taking a more holistic approach, honestly, and is thinking about nature-based solutions in the role of how we're going to adapt to climate change. And I think there have been colleagues in departments beyond the electric department who are wondering sort of, we do a lot and we don't get quite the recognition, arguably, because we're doing things that don't come with a lot of funding. There's electricity is tangible, and we've got the renewable energy standard money to help offer rebates and incentives. Nature-based solutions is sometimes overlooked, I would say. And I'm really pleased that I think this current administration is going to think about not only continuing to mitigate, but also adapting and becoming more resilient. So, that's a change I'm really eager to embrace.
Yeah, I would say more so than the city administrator, is hired by city council, and that is the one person that city council directly supervises. And city council turns over, there is turnover in city council, and how supportive council is for the climate work and the sustainability office can vary. Um, we have a lot of council support right now, and as pendulums swing and change is dramatic or hard, sometimes that can vary. So one of the things that we work really hard on is trying to institutionalize as much as we can, so that it is not just our department, but we are working with public works, and we are working with transportation, and we are working with police and fire, who now have the first police pursuit vehicle that's electric. And we are working, we are trying to institutionalize our work and build relationships within the city, so that transitions at council and transitions in our city administration don't completely, rock our boat as much as they might otherwise. It's yeah, I guess that's my answer there.
That's great.
I think the one thing I would add is one thing our mayor-elect has really been trying to discuss is affordability and activating Albany and building Albany up. So I think one of the things that our office needs to do better when she comes in is kind of align what we know about climate science and climate action to those goals and find the synergy. Crime is with heat, and housing stability has to do with climate action and weatherization and all those things, flooding. There is synergies that exist in our work across departments. That is the best practices within climate action that can speak to the mayor's goals and hopefully help out. So as she's coming into office, I'm looking forward to kind of working with her in that way as well, and realizing some of the shared goals that our office has with our community. Because we might not all be speaking the same language, but we do ultimately have the same goal for Albany, which is sustaining a long future and building up our residents. So with that in mind, I think we'll have a good direction going forward.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this discussion. Thank you for the questions. I'm going to pass it back in our last minute to Stacy to close the event.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. A special thank you to all of our speakers today. So Anne, Julie, Emma, Jennifer, and Julia, really appreciate your time and insights today, and it was a terrific discussion. So the webinar has been recorded, and we'll make it available soon on our website. We dropped a link in the chat. We will also follow up soon with a newly published brief of key findings from the scale study that Julia presented. So look for that in a follow-up email. I want to thank everyone again for spending time with us today. We hope to see you at a future event, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you again to our panel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.